Hello and welcome to Rights of a Free People, a program of the Rhode Island affiliate of the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm Dan WEISMAN, a volunteer at the ACLU and the host of this program. Our topic this month is, as one might expect, the newly beginning, or the beginning newly, session of the Rhode Island legislature. We are looking at several bills and policies that are of interest to people who are concerned about civil liberties, which should be everybody. And we have with us two people who will be in the forefront of the bills we're looking at and the fate of those bills. Starting nearest to me is Teresa Tanzi, who is a state representative from District 34, representing Narragansett and South Kingston. Thank you for being here.
It is my pleasure.
And we know you've been here before, so you're not a rookie. And Rebecca Kislak, also not a rookie, has been on the program before, newly elected to represent District 4, which is the east side of Providence, part of the east side of Providence. Congratulations on the victory. And Rebecca is also a past president of Rhode Island National Organization of Women.
Yes.
Very good. We have the A-team here for this legislative preview. We've got three bills that are carryovers from last year. We're going to look at these three. We know they'll be on the agenda this year. As always, we flipped a coin. And depending on your point of view, Teresa won or lost, but gets to go first. So here we go. There's a bill, all three bills obviously didn't reach full success. So that's why they're back in this session. The first one we want to look at is sexual harassment in the workplace. What happened last year? How far did it get?
Right.
What was your involvement with it? Where do you think it's headed this year?
Sure. So last October was the real moment for Me Too to have broken out, and I had shared my experiences up at the Statehouse, and really I think the experiences of many women throughout workplaces all throughout the country. But as a result of having publicly shared that, I worked with the Speaker to create a commission to look at sexual harassment in the workplace and to propose updates to the existing legislation. We had a wonderful, diverse group of individuals, Police Chiefs Association. We had both Democrat and Republican legislators. We had people from academia, the Commission on Human Rights, really just a very good deep bench of individuals there to look at these things. And we came up with 9 pieces of legislation. It was really a very robust package.
Broad support.
Incredibly broad support. When I had originally begun looking at these issues, I had an idea in my head as to where I wanted to go with these things. And, we had business representation at the table, very quickly, as time began to run out on the clock, we realized we had to put forward a package that had real teeth to it, but also was simple enough to understand in a short period of time and easily digestible, so that we wouldn't get a lot of robust opposition to it. So I'd like to say that we left more on the table than we brought to the table. We really did. So where I would have started in a normal year, we really went right for the middle. And just to highlight on some of the bills that were proposed, everything from changing the definition for employees. These definitions haven't been looked at literally in decades. So it was limited to 4 or fewer employees. Under current statute, it still is. And it excluded people like household workers. So if you have a nanny or you have a domestic worker of any sort, you can discriminate against them for, reasons of gender or sex or race or religious affiliation, all of those things under current law. We were looking to get rid of those. So no matter how large the employer and no matter the type of work you were doing, we were looking to add volunteers and interns into the definition because they're currently left out of it. So really, some very clear need to broaden the definition and to remove lots of exclusions. So that was one of the bills. We also
That did happen, or?
I have to say that for all of the bills that we put through and all of the work that we did on them, not a single one passed. And I think it's safe to say that the theme of today's show is, women's issues were left behind in the 2018 General Assembly session. You're going to hear a theme coming over and over as we go through each of the topic areas. But, we had significant opportunities with really strong legislation that were time and again left on the table on the House side.
So one of the bills would have set a fairly low limit for the number of employees covered.
Correct. Federal is 15 or fewer are exempt. And as a state, we have 4 or fewer, and we were going to bring it down to 0. So there would be no...
So right now it's still 4.
It is.
So if you have 4 or fewer employees, had the bill passed, it wouldn't apply.
Had the bill passed, as long as it wasn't a family member, and then that's a different part of the statute.
Okay. All right, moving on. So that was one of the 9.
Yeah, another one is, and this is one that people are probably most familiar with, the non-disclosure agreements and the non-disparagement agreements. So we heard a lot about this in the news. And as a condition of employment, we were looking to prohibit the use. That wound up being a little bit more controversial than we had initially hoped. And what we wound up doing is that any agreement would become void if any person's civil rights were violated. So, you would enter into this agreement and then say you were harassed in according to any of the protected classes, that part of the contract would become void. So the non-disparagement and the non-disclosure.
Well, because you can't sign away protected rights.
Under my legislation, that would be the case. But under current statute, that is in fact the case.
Oh, all right. Other highlights?
Reporting requirements, making sure that state agencies are following the existing, requirements, which, not surprisingly, they are not. And I think one of the ones that the ACLU was most interested in, other than the non-disparagement, was extending the time frame in which you could bring forward a complaint. So right now, it's 1 year from the last incident. And we were looking to bring that, we had 2 different ways of doing it, but one was just to bring that statute out to 2 years. And then another one was something called tolling, where while things were under investigation, so say you met that 1 year requirement under existing statute, you would get another year added on once the investigation began. Because oftentimes employers would drag their feet and then say, oh, so sad, your statute of limitations is no longer current. So we wanted to just do what we could to really give survivors and victims the opportunity to come forward in a more reasonable time frame.
So what about contract workers? That's since whatever exists, last time historically these issues were visited, that's grown as a percent of the workforce. Right.
The gig economy, we were really trying to update these statutes. And that was something that was, again, on the table in the beginning, but left off the table at the end. These are things that we're certainly welcome to review and revisit this coming year in the 2019 legislative session. But they're very difficult to define. You'll find it really, among the people who sat on the commission, there was no agreement. There was no consensus on what that could be. Some people were saying real estate agents, would be part of that. And, who does the contract with, who falls under it? These are very tricky discussions.
So what happened to the 9 bills? They didn't pass. Where was the problem?
We had a great hearing in House Labor Committee with our chair, Chair Craven. He opened up the hearing by saying that, these were great bills. He had worked with us very closely in the preparing of them, and he said he looked forward to passing them. The roadblock literally came from what we refer to as the 3rd floor. It came directly from Speaker Mattiello. As much work as we put into these, it didn't matter. As much as we built consensus around these bills and these issues, it really didn't matter. They were dismissed out of hand, and the only reason that I was given is we ran out of time, which is really, I hate to say it, a joke when you consider that we were able to do sports betting, right? The entire piece of that, multi-million-dollar endeavor that the state took on this year in under 3 hours.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have a sense, I want to move on to the other bills, but
Absolutely.
before we, just to close this one out, do you think the objections from the third floor were substantive or
No, I was
technical in nature?
The speaker flat out told me that he hadn't even read the bills. And
More disinterest?
I mean, in my opinion, I would say there was a disinterest, there was a disassociation, there was just not really being in touch with the wants and needs. I mean, there was a WPRI poll that said 85% of Rhode Islanders, which it's pretty hard to get 85% of Rhode Islanders to agree on anything, other than we miss bennies. But 85% said that sexual harassment was a significant problem. So it should have passed. It was very
Yeah.
short-sighted of the speaker to ignore those needs.
And as a member of the public last year and an advocate, just watching what happened at the end of session was incredibly disappointing. And I testified on all of the bills that we're talking about today last year, and all of this package of bills was well received in committee, was well received by all of the people who gave up their time to come testify on these bills and on the importance of passing these bills. I know some members of Representative Tanzi's commission and how hard they all worked, how they brought in experts to come learn together about what the best practices are around the country and what would be best practice here in Rhode Island to develop this package of bills. So when I hear that time was short, I know how hard the commission worked and what went into drafting these bills, and really hope that these and all of the legislation that we're going to talk about today comes up quickly and at the beginning of session.
Well, related to harassment is pay,
Yes.
which could be a form of harassment.
Right, absolutely.
So there was an equal pay bill.
Yes,
You were involved with that.
I advocated for the Fair Pay Act. I think it is really important to increase enforcement and the tools that we have to ensure that everybody in a workplace is paid fairly, no matter what our gender is, our race, and or any other reason why we might be paid in a disparate fashion. I know as a lawyer, and I've heard from friends, and as a colleague, I've heard lots of stories over the years from folks wondering, are we being paid fairly? Or somebody saying, I'm pretty sure, or I know that I'm being paid less than my colleague who sits in the cubicle next to me. I just heard about a lawsuit this morning that the flute player for the Boston Symphony Orchestra is paid substantially less than her male colleague who plays the oboe. And she is suing for that. And that's really important, and we need more tools to be able to know how much we should be paid, to know if we're being paid fairly. Some companies are already undertaking voluntary audits and are surprised to learn that even though they thought they were paying people equally, they are not. And so the Fair Pay Act would put into place some more protection, some more knowledge, some more information. It would make sure that colleagues could talk to each other, that there couldn't be prohibitions on talking to colleagues about what you get paid. It would make sure that employees had more information about pay scales and the jobs they are applying for, and it would put in some more enforcement rules into place, all of which is really important.
And these laws, similarly, haven't been updated in 50 years. So again, we're just really looking to update our laws. You know, the economy has changed, situations have changed, more and more women are entering the workplace, and you know, we deserve the same protections.
Right.
So,
And
go on.
oh, I was just going to say that the way that this session ended again with this bill was incredibly disappointing, in that the Senate passed a version of the bill, and then the House passed a different version of the bill. The House's version would have brought us backwards and would have decreased enforcement tools
From what they are.
from what they are today. So
Not from the
instead of
Senate, but
moving us forward, it would have moved us backwards. And that's incredibly disappointing. And I hope that we move forward with the Senate version of the bill this year.
Is it the same story, the third floor, or is this coming from more different places?
So I have not yet been seated as a representative, so I haven't seen up close firsthand that the way that works, but it's one of the reasons why I am pushing for, and my constituents are insisting on, more open and transparent government. From an observer on the outside, it happened very quickly. It happened as a substitute bill that was submitted at the last minute, before representatives or advocates had the opportunity to really understand what was in it, without time to discuss. And we really need to change the way that the House works, so that there's more openness, more transparency, so that everybody knows what's happening in our government.
To give a little more detail to that, it passed out of committee in one form.
In the House?
In the House. And this was literally months after the Senate had passed their version. And we waited months and months to pass it out of our committee, our Judiciary Committee. And minutes before it appeared on the floor, a new version of it was very quickly negotiated in the House lounge, and before the sponsor herself was able to fully read it and vet it, before any of the co-sponsors or anyone who was voting on it. So 73 members had never even seen this bill prior to them introducing it on the floor, and us being on the fly expected to read, I don't even remember how many pages it was, but I'm literally formulating my questions according to the pieces that were edited out and amended out. And we very quickly, thank goodness, realized that there were changes that Providence had just enacted through local ordinances that would have overturned all of the work that city councilors in Providence had given as protections to their citizens. So, this really, I think that of all the bills that we worked on in the 2018 session, this one has become the calling card for why we need more transparency and accountability.
Yeah. Time is sort of moving on. I want to leave enough time for kind of a Q&A at the end. But reproductive health care. Yes. I remember this as on our agenda for a while.
Yes.
And it's apparently still is.
It still is. And we're incredibly hopeful that 2019 will be the year where we fix this. And again, we have polling, statewide polling, that shows overwhelmingly people are in support of codifying the protections that Roe v. Wade have given us as a nation since '73. It really is a pretty simple bill that Representative Agello introduced last year on the House side and Gail Golden on the Senate side. It didn't pass on either side, but with the newly elected majorities in both chambers of pro-choice individuals, we're very confident that, between the public's outcry for this and the clear support in both chambers for it, we feel that it should pass quickly and pass with great, strong support.
And there's reasons to be immediate, as the Supreme Court is possibly going to address this with its stronger conservative majority.
Absolutely, and I know that Rhode Islanders expect Rhode Island to protect us and to protect our access to reproductive health care. This bill protects the status quo, which is why it's what we should be doing right now. As I was campaigning this summer, I was not surprised to hear overwhelming support for passing the Reproductive Health Care Act. But one thing that did surprise me is how many people I met at their doors who assumed that Rhode Island already protects us, that we already are sure that our rights to access reproductive health care are the law. So we need to do this.
We've talked about it for years, so it's understandable people might think there's been some progress.
I think a part of it is also that we live in a very heavily democratic state, and people expect that to mean that we are pro-choice Democrats here, as the National Party is a pro-choice Democratic Party. So people are surprised that there's a difference.
Yeah.
There's a few planks missing sometimes from the Rhode Island Democratic platform.
I'm sure. So all three bills had unsatisfying conclusions, and all three will be introduced as soon as the session begins.
Yes, many were pre-filed,
So even as you guys take your seats, this will be
Yes.
in your to-do pile.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And let's move on to one of my favorite topics when we have this program, particularly with a newly elected member of the House. What was it like running for the first time? What were people saying to you? You convinced enough people to vote for you. And sort of, what are you thinking to do when you get there? When you have sort of a mindset, I'm going to get there, I'm going to do a lot of work, blah, blah, blah. So kind of give us a kind of a window into what your experiences have been.
Yes, I loved campaigning and talking to voters, and in fact, I just had a community coffee this morning to talk to voters and want to keep doing it. I loved hearing the hopes and expectations. One of the things I'm very passionate about is connecting people to our state government. I think that's very, very important. I think that the more people who show up at the State House to participate and to watch what's happening, the better it is for all of us. And I've been going up to the State House for about 10 years now, and it felt a little bit different these last 2 years. There have been more advocates, more citizens coming up to watch what's happening there, and that changes a little bit what happens in the building. And I want to keep connecting constituents to our state government. I'm fortunate in that my district is very close to the State House, and constituents can come up for an hour pretty easily and participate. And I want to keep making that easier and easier, and I want to keep making the government more open and responsive and transparent. So I'm also looking at the rules of the House that govern our internal operations to make sure that we can do what we can, everything possible, that our government should be open and transparent, and that last minute legislative maneuvers like what happened to the Fair Pay Act at the end of session is not a thing that's going to happen going forward.
Yeah. You've mentioned changes, that there are changes going on in many ways, always. I think that's one of the givens. But in the legislature itself, and this may be a Teresa question, have you been in the legislature about 5 years?
I actually just won for my 5th term, so 8 years down and a fresh 2, looking down at a fresh 2.
Excellent. So do you see positive changes, reasons to be optimistic as we move into the new term?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist, but realistically speaking, it is going to take a lot more engagement of the average citizen to come up and demand that changes happen. You know, the two bills that I spoke of, overwhelmingly supported by the majority of Rhode Islanders, and yet somehow their will is subverted. And that has to change. We really do have 75 unique individuals who hear directly from their constituents, who bring their concerns up to the State House, and we have to find a more small d democratic way to make sure that their voices are heard. There shouldn't be, you know, one gatekeeper. One of our colleagues refers to it as a committee of one who gets to determine what happens and what doesn't happen. So, you know, I'm optimistic that more and more people will become engaged and will demand these changes.
So this is a great opportunity. Here we are at the cusp of the new session. A veteran, a rookie, millions of watchers.
Of course.
Our audience is all over the place. What advice would you give a newcomer who sees this as a tremendous opportunity? You've got some battle scars, also some successes.
Yeah.
So what should Rebecca have in mind? How should she kind of get started?
It is, I mean, we've spent a lot of time together over the years. Rebecca's been a lifelong advocate as long as I've been there. I've seen her up there. So we've been having these conversations, I would say, for years. But, you know, to any incoming, you know, newly elected individual, I would say the first couple of months are incredibly slow. And don't let that deter you. Use that opportunity to advocate for the bills that are important to you, get to know your fellow legislators, and get to understand what's important to them as well, because it is a two-way street, and make the most of your time in that building. Stick around and go to committee hearings that you don't even belong on those committees, and really get to understand the way things work and the individuals who, you know, who you're working with.
So with the last minute we have, turn it on to me.
Okay.
A member of the public, been to the State House,
Yeah.
often discouragingly.
Yeah.
What's your advice to us as ultimately the consumers? We make jokes and we disparage the General Assembly. Give me some advice.
Follow the blog, the ACLU blog. Look forward to, you know, see what the ACLU is doing to weigh in, and amplify. Use, you know, your supporters to amplify, you know, the perspective of the ACLU. Have them directly call. You know, you cannot overdo it when it comes to reaching out to your elected officials and letting them know. And that's not just your elected representatives or senators, it's also the governor, it's also the Secretary of State's office. And finding those places, the Attorney General's office, we have a brand new Attorney General coming in. Use your voice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And RI.gov, right?
RI.gov, and then you can go to the General Assembly website and see what's coming on.
Follow the breadcrumbs and you'll end up at the General Assembly.
Indeed.
RI.gov, easy to remember.
Yeah. RI.gov it is. And, you know, we get started each day around 4 o'clock on the House. And, you know, this confusing thing of at the rise means when we're done with our work on the floor. So when you are told to be there at the rise, it's anywhere in the early days, you know, in the early part of the year, 4:30. And as the days and the sessions on the House floor get longer, you know, more like 5 or 6 o'clock. But, you know, be prepared and bring a snack.
And also, I think it's great when people come and talk to your legislators before session starts at 4. So show up at 3:30. Go find people on the floor, your legislator, another one, and come say hi.
I always bring a sense of humor because I need that there.
Bring cookies.
Bring cookies. On that note, I want to thank you, and of course, you're both legislators are available to their constituents. Contact information for the ACLU will appear on your screen. I believe it is showing now. And give us a look. We can link you to your legislator, and let's have a good time this session.
That's right.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Oh, we're supposed to talk to each other. We're off mic
Okay.
now, so.